A grand Victorian mansion in Westfield, New Jersey stood eerily silent in late 1971, its lights blazing day and night with no sign of the family who lived there. Neighbors grew suspicious as mail piled up, as if the family living there had just dropped off the face of the earth. When police finally entered the home, they found a ghastly scene. 5 bodies, a mother, 3 children, and their elderly grandmother, were laid out on sleeping bags in the ballroom. A religious hymn played softly on a radio that had been set to a Christian station, and the house's air conditioning was cranked up high to slow decomposition. On a desk lay a 5-page letter confessing to the acts and offering a disturbing justification. The author of that letter and the man responsible for the carnage was John List, a church-going accountant and father who had been regarded as a pillar of the community. To everyone in Westfield, John List appeared to be a model family man. Born in 1925 and raised by strict Lutheran parents, List was devoutly religious and taught Sunday school, embodying an image of piety and discipline. He was an Army veteran and a college-educated accountant who by the mid-1960s had secured a position as a bank vice president. In 1965, he moved with his family to a 19-room mansion named Breeze Knoll in the affluent suburbs of Westfield, complete with an elegant ballroom. Outwardly, they were the picture of suburban success and propriety. Yet behind the facade, John List was under immense pressure. By 1971, he was in serious financial trouble as he had lost his job as a bank executive and was secretly struggling to find work while debt mounted. Every morning he pretended to go off to his office, maintaining the routine so his family wouldn't know he'd been laid off. In reality, he spent his days at the train station or job hunting, too prideful to admit his failure. He began siphoning money from his elderly mother's bank accounts to keep up with the mortgage payments on the mansion. At the same time, Helen List's health and behavior were deteriorating. She had a number of chronic illnesses, including complications from syphilis and alcoholism that made her increasingly unstable and often led her to publicly ridicule John. The once orderly household was fracturing under financial strain and personal tensions. John List's strict religious beliefs compounded his desperation. A devout Lutheran, he feared that the hardships of poverty would cause his family to stray from their faith. In his warped reasoning, he came to see only 2 possible outcomes for his family's crisis: accept public assistance and downsize, or slay his family to quote-unquote save them from the worldly evils of poverty. By late 1971, the 46-year-old Sunday school teacher had convinced himself that the latter option was a tragic necessity. Or at least that's how he would frame it, and given the horrific acts he committed, I'm not quite sure this is someone whose word we should be taking at face value. On the morning of November 9th, 1971, John List put his plan into action. It seemed like a normal Tuesday at the List household. He saw his children off to school as usual. But once alone in the big house, he went out to the garage and retrieved 2 handguns he had stashed. He then returned inside the mansion and headed for the kitchen, where his 46-year-old wife Helen was sipping her morning coffee. Without warning, John raised one of the guns and shot Helen in the back of the head at close range, eliminating her instantly. He dragged her body on a sleeping bag into the home's cavernous ballroom, leaving a trail of blood that he carefully mopped up to hide any sign of violence. Upstairs, his elderly mother Alma had heard the commotion. John climbed the stairs to the 3rd-floor apartment where Alma lived, found her waiting in confusion at the threshold. There he shot his 84-year-old mother just above her left eye, again apparently to save her from the horrors of poverty. And yeah, if you couldn't tell, that was a bit of sarcasm, since I don't really believe a word of this guy's confession. He then attempted to bring her into the ballroom, but found that she was too heavy for him to move down the stairs, so he left her there. With his wife and mother dead, List had a few hours before his children would come home from school. In a remarkably composed manner, he went about cleaning the crime scenes. He scrubbed the kitchen floor where Helen had fallen and disposed of blood-stained rags. He then fixed himself a sandwich for lunch and sat down at the kitchen table to eat, waiting calmly for his children's return. I'm going to spare you the details of what happened next, but he ambushed the kids as they all came home at different times. Disturbingly, evidence would show that while two of the teenagers didn't know what happened to them, one of them fought back and knew full well what his father had done. Before he left the house, John List took a few final steps to delay the discovery of the crime. He gathered and cut his face out of every family photograph in the home, ensuring police wouldn't have a recent picture of him to release. He turned the thermostat as low as possible and left the radio tuned to a religious music station. He hoped the chilled air and continuous hymns would mask the odor of decay and make it seem like someone was still living in the house. Days earlier, he had already put his plan in motion by contacting the children's schools to say that they would be away for the next couple weeks. He had stopped the mail, milk, and newspaper deliveries to the mansion as best he could, though some mail would eventually start trickling through. All of these preparations worked. Not a single person realized anything was wrong at the List home for nearly a month. The bodies of his family lay decomposing for 4 weeks under the blast of the air conditioning, while religious music drifted through the empty halls. It was not until December 7th, 1971, almost 29 days after the slayings, that police were finally called to investigate the List residence. Officers entering through an unlocked window were met with the overwhelming smell of death. They discovered 4 bodies in the ballroom, and Alma's upstairs, along with John's confession letter detailing the motive for the slayings. By then, List was long gone, and all that remained was a mystery, a family annihilator who had vanished into thin air, leaving a community in shock. In the meantime, List had assumed a new identity and began to live a different life. Under the highly generic name of Bob Clark, List managed to obtain new documents, including a Social Security card, and restarted his life as if he were an entirely different person. Living quietly in Denver, John List continued working in accounting, the same profession he'd had before. He joined a Lutheran church community there, blending in as a congenial middle-aged man. By all accounts, he kept a low profile and avoided trouble with the law, which helped him evade detection. He even met a woman at a church gathering, and they got married in 1985, all while she believed she was in a relationship with Bob Clark. By the late 1980s, it seemed John List might indeed get away with his atrocious crimes. He had built an entirely new life, and even those close to him had no idea who he really was. However, law enforcement and the public had not forgotten the List slayings. In 1989, a popular television program gave the cold case new life. America's Most Wanted, a TV show dedicated to profiling fugitives, decided to feature the John List case during its first year on air. On May 21, 1989, the show aired a segment recounting List's crimes and his disappearance. The authorities received hundreds of tips, most of which were baseless. However, one of these tips came from a friend of the wife of a quiet religious accountant named Bob Clark. On June 1, 1989, nearly 18 years after John List had vanished, federal agents arrived at the accounting office where 63-year-old Bob Clark worked. They found List at his desk and arrested him on the spot. At first, the man insisted he was not John List at all, coolly maintaining his Bob Clark persona. But the charade didn't last long. Faced with fingerprint evidence and the mounting proof of his true identity, John List eventually admitted who he really was. He showed no remorse, and one of the FBI agents who brought him in eventually described him as a husk of a human being. In 1990, John List finally faced justice in a New Jersey courtroom. He went on trial for the 5 slayings and, not surprisingly, was found guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge noted the calculated nature of the crimes and the lack of remorse, and imposed the maximum penalty, 5 life terms in prison. In the years that followed, John List gave a few interviews from prison that provided a glimpse into his still twisted mindset. In a 2002 interview, List expressed a degree of regret, saying he wished he hadn't done it and had prayed for forgiveness. Yet disturbingly, he still reiterated his disgusting reasoning for committing the acts. And perhaps most chillingly of all, when he was asked why he didn't finish himself off, he stated that doing so would have barred him from entry into heaven. John List died in prison in 2008 at the age of 82 from complications of pneumonia. He spent his final 18 years in a New Jersey state prison where he was reportedly a quiet, unremarkable inmate. On a warm August morning in 2025, residents of a quiet senior living community in West Phoenix woke to a horrifying scene. Inside one of the complex's apartments lay the body of a teenage girl, 15-year-old Kelowna Smiley, dead from a gunshot wound. The setting was shocking. A retirement complex for seniors, hardly a typical place for violent crime. Immediately, questions swirled about what had brought this young girl to such an unlikely place and who could have harmed her. The mystery deepened when, just days later, the man identified by police as the prime suspect, a 67-year-old resident of the community, was found dead by his own hand. Kelowna Smiley was an ordinary 15-year-old girl with a vibrant personality and a bright future. She was about to start her freshman year at Trevor G. Brown High School in Phoenix. Her mother, Fiona Austin, described her as outgoing and outspoken, a teenager with a big personality and a caring heart. In the summer of 2025, Kelowna was enjoying her last days of vacation before high school, but sadly, those days would be her last. In early August 2025, Kelowna left home on Friday, August 1st, planning to stay over at a friend's house for a couple of days. When she didn't return home as expected on Monday, her worried mother filed a missing persons report with the Phoenix police. At that point, Fiona Austin was anxious, but hopeful that her daughter would be found safe. Little did she know that by the time she reported Kelowna missing, the worst had already happened. On Monday morning, August 4th, 2025, around 9:40 a.m., Phoenix police officers responded to an apartment at a senior living complex. Inside, they discovered a female victim with an apparent gunshot wound. She was pronounced dead at the scene. At first, officers assumed the victim was an adult because of the setting, but later that week, authorities confirmed the deceased was actually Kelowna. A teenager had been killed in a place meant for retirees, a scenario that baffled both investigators and residents of the community. Police secured the area and immediately launched an investigation into the slaying. From the outset, there were far more questions than answers. Detectives couldn't determine what had led up to the shooting, or how Kelowna ended up in that apartment. Kelowna didn't live at the complex, and her mother confirmed she had no known reason to be there. There were no immediate witnesses, and the elderly residents were just as confused as the police. The question on everyone's mind was how and why a 15-year-old girl had come to be the victim of a shooting in a senior community. Phoenix detectives worked quickly to identify a suspect in the days after the attack. Before long, they focused on one of the complex's residents, 67-year-old Nohe Prado Morelia. Police haven't revealed exactly what evidence linked Morelia to the crime, and it remains unclear if he had any prior connection to Kelowna. However, her family knew of no link between them, essentially making him a stranger to her. Nevertheless, he rapidly became the prime suspect in Kelowna's death. When investigators attempted to locate Morelia for questioning, they discovered that he had already disappeared. On Friday, August 8th, 4 days after Kelowna was slain, officers responded to a call at a business area in Phoenix. There, miles away from the scene of the crime, officers found Morelia's body, and it was evident that he had intentionally checked out. This development meant that police would never be able to interrogate Morelia about the crime. In the aftermath of Morelia's death, detectives continued working to confirm that he was indeed the killer. A police press release later stated that evidence established Morelia as the person responsible for Kelowna's slaying, and no other suspects were involved. Authorities announced that the case was considered solved and was being closed. However, one crucial piece remained missing: the motive. Investigators acknowledged that the motive for the killing remained unknown. Even Phoenix's police chief admitted that the investigation was still very preliminary, and that he knew of no further details yet. With the suspect gone, any explanation for his actions remains elusive. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to click like and subscribe, and to check out the YouTube membership and the Patreon. Also remember to check out my podcast, Lazy Chill True Crime, by clicking the link in the description. Just days before Christmas 2016, a quiet Georgia home erupted into chaos. Nicole Brazil was settling into bed when she heard a series of pops she assumed were firecrackers. Instead, she found her 23-year-old daughter, Ashley, bleeding on the living room couch, and her 16-year-old son standing over her with a weapon. In a flat, eerily calm voice, Sonny Kim told his mother that Ashley was dead, while Christmas decorations hung in the room as a macabre backdrop to the unimaginable scene. Sonny Kim's case is as perplexing as it is tragic. He was by all accounts a brilliant nerd, a quiet, brainy teen with an IQ near genius level and a deep love of computers and books. He was shy and far more comfortable with gadgets and games than with crowds of people. Sonny and Ashley were both exceptionally smart, and they would playfully tease each other about who was the bigger nerd. He built his own PCs and landed a part-time job at a local computer shop while barely a teenager. Sonny graduated high school early and was taking college classes by 16. Nothing in his upbringing or past behavior suggested violence, which made his actions in December 2016 all the more shocking and difficult to comprehend. On the evening of December 20th, 2016, Ashley Kim was back home in Martinez, Georgia for the holidays. She had been living in Colorado and was eager to spend Christmas with her family. The family spent the night sharing laughs and enjoying each other's company. There were no fights, no outbursts, nothing to foreshadow what was about to happen. Sometime around midnight, Sonny retrieved a .45 caliber pistol. Shockingly, the very gun he had purchased as a Christmas gift for his stepdad and secretly unwrapped early. Then he walked quietly into the living room and without a word, he raised the weapon and opened fire on Ashley as she relaxed on the couch. He shot her 8 times at point-blank range, ensuring that there was virtually no possibility that she could survive the storm of lead. Hearing the shots, Nicole and her husband eventually burst out of their bedroom to see what exactly was happening. They were greeted by a ghastly sight: Ashley sprawled on the sofa, and Sonny standing over her with a firearm. When Nicole cried out in confusion and terror, Sunny responded with an emotionless declaration that her daughter was already gone. Sunny then turned the weapon toward his stepfather and mother, apparently intent on cutting them down as well. He later admitted to investigators that he had planned to slay his entire family and then himself, though he couldn't articulate any logical reason why. As Sunny aimed at James and Nicole, fate intervened. The weapon either jammed or ran out of ammunition after the burst of shots at Ashley. James seized the opportunity to tackle the teenager and wrestle the weapon away from Sunny. With Sunny subdued, James dialed the cops while Nicole tried in vain to tend to Ashley. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but 23-year-old Ashley was beyond help and was pronounced deceased at the scene. Investigators soon observed that Sunny's demeanor was oddly calm and detached for a boy who had just slaughtered his sister. During a videotaped interrogation, he was cooperative and polite, and spoke in a cold and detached manner. When asked the burning question, "Why did you do this?" Sunny had no clear answer. He insisted it wasn't out of anger or any dispute. In essence, he claimed he just did it without fully understanding why, and this baffling lack of motive would become a central issue in the case. In the wake of the attack, Sunny's family and the community struggled to make sense of the senseless. Nicole Brazil was convinced that something had gone terribly wrong in her son's mind. She knew Sunny adored Ashley and had never shown a violent tendency before. Mental health experts did in fact find serious issues underlying Sunny's shocking act. Psychologists who examined him in jail diagnosed Sunny with Asperger's syndrome and noted he showed symptoms of a schizophrenia-like psychosis. In plain terms, it appeared he may have experienced a sudden break from reality, a psychotic episode, that led to the extreme violence. Sunny himself later described feeling as if he wasn't in control, and he expressed fear that he could snap again without warning. This understanding offered a possible explanation, albeit an unsettling one. The brain that made Sunny so intelligent and unique also harbored a latent darkness that erupted unpredictably. Legal proceedings against Sunny moved slowly. As a 16-year-old charged with a slaying, he was held in juvenile custody and then transferred to adult court. There were delays as public defenders came and went, and as attorneys weighed how to handle his mental state. Ultimately, nearly 3 years after the disturbing act, Sunny Kim pleaded guilty to the slaying of Ashley and related charges in July 2019. By accepting a plea deal, he avoided a trial and possible additional penalties, and he spared his parents the ordeal of reliving the tragedy in court. At the sentencing hearing, the emotional weight of the case was on full display. Sunny, then 19, apologized and accepted responsibility in his own quiet way, while his mother addressed him with a mix of love and anguish. The judge sentenced Sunny to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years, with a strict condition that he receive ongoing mental health treatment while incarcerated. In practical terms, this means Sunny will be nearly 50 years old before he can even be considered for release. In delivering the sentence, the judge emphasized that addressing Sunny's mental health was crucial, implicitly recognizing that this crime was born from illness as much as intent. Outside the courthouse, the Kim family was left to grapple with heartbreak. They had lost Ashley forever, and in a sense they lost Sunny too to the prison system. An unexpected twist to this story emerged a couple of years into Sunny's life behind bars. In late 2021, true crime followers were surprised to discover that Sunny Kim had surfaced on Reddit, apparently using a smuggled cell phone from prison. Posting in the subreddit r/prison, a user believed to be Sunny shared photos of a prison cell that looked more like a geeky college dorm. The walls were adorned with hand-drawn fantasy and furry-style art, and shelves were stacked with paperback novels and role playing game manuals. In follow up comments, the inmate answered questions from other Reddit users in a surprisingly friendly and upbeat tone. He joked about staying positive and said he would remain a nerd until the day he dies. He even recounted witnessing a grisly incident, an inmate stabbing his own bunkmate and hiding the body on a top bunk, with a disturbing detachment, as if it were an everyday anecdote. The idea of someone convicted for such a crime casually chatting online and showing off his hobbies from prison was jarring to many. Some Reddit readers were fascinated by the glimpse into an incarcerated person's daily life, especially one with such a nerdy intellectual bent. However, many others were disturbed. Commenters pointed out that behind the post was a man who had slain his own sister, and they criticized any responses that seemed to flatter or humanize him. As of 2025, Sonny Kim remains behind bars in Georgia, undergoing treatment and living out his days in a prison cell filled with books and drawings. He will be a much older man before he has any chance of release, and it's uncertain what kind of person he'll be if that day comes. What is certain is the lasting impact of his actions. A beloved sister's life cut short, and a family that must carry the weight of an unfathomable loss of two family members in one tragic, disturbed incident.